So moving on to your solo work, A Curious Feeling. What are your memories of that period of time?
Well, the biggest recollection of recording it, well, quite a few really actually. I went over there we recorded it in Polar Studios in Stockholm, which was ABBA's studio, because Dave Henschel had seen it and thought it might be appropriate. I think we actually went to see it or not, I can't remember. We liked the fact it had a live room anyhow, because we wanted to sort of that kind of sound of it. Anyhow, it was a rough crossing out there, I remember. But Dave Henschel, of course, he got mumps, so he wasn't there for the first week. So I was there with studio time with, there was obviously Chester Thompson, and there was Kim Beacon, who was a singer, and fortunately, and an engineer, the tape op, was a guy called Dave Bascom, who of course later on became a very well-known producer in his own right, actually. But at the time, we were all pretty green at this stuff, so we just put it onto tape, and fortunately, just sort of got it on there all right, really. And then Dave actually came out in the second week. But it was a slightly traumatic and a little bit kind of, they sort of felt the sort of stars were kind of in the wrong place, as it were. So it was quite a difficult thing, but it was a lot of, it was instructive for me to do, because I decided, probably lack of confidence in a way. I didn't want to have other musicians on it particularly. I got Chester, he was the drummer at Genesis at the time, and good friend and someone who's sympathetic to the kind of music. He always used to really like things like One for the Vine, which is perhaps is what Curious Feeling most closely resembles. So all that was good, and I decided I'd play everything else myself. I used to play a lot of guitar in Genesis anyhow, so that was all right. So I thought, well, I can do that. So how about a bit of lead guitar and a bit of bass? That's slightly more difficult, actually. Bass guitar is a surprisingly difficult instrument to play. You think, well, it's just four strings, bang away. I had to put sort of foam underneath the strings to stop the other ones vibrating and all that, and I kept the parts incredibly simple and just about got away with it. And the lead guitar, I had to do similar things in terms of sort of making strings not resonate, but the resultant effect sounded a bit like a synthesizer anyhow. So it was almost a waste of time, because the only bit of real lead guitar on it was on the piece The Waters of Lethe, and it could as easily been a synthesizer really, but it's very instructive for me really to do all that. And to me it's one of my favourite things I was ever involved with of any kind, Genesis, not Genesis, classical, anything. It was a moment in time for me, and I was writing a lot of stuff at the time, and I just thought it worked really well. And I think the story, although I had to adapt the story, because I originally was writing based on the short story Flowers for Algernon, which is by Daniel Keyes, which is a favourite story of mine, which has actually been done a few times in various ways. But just at the time I was going to make this record, there was a musical in London came out based on it called Charlie. And I didn't know that it was going to be a hit or not. I should have stuck to my guns and done it, I think, but I went to see the thing and I think it was all right, but after 9 days it closed. So it was, it's one of those little moments really. So I had to adapt. Could use some of the lyrics in the new idea, and then I had to change some more radically. And I think the story works okay. It makes some of these, you get a few slightly contrived lyrics, but overall I'm pretty happy with the way it sounds. And I think instrumentally, particularly The Waters of Lethe, was a really strong moment.
Is that your favourite track on the album?
I think it's my favourite track on the album. Yeah, it's got all those kind of Ravel type moments that I like on it, and I just think it's a very stirring melody, and it's got those big chords in the middle which work well. But I think the singing on the album, because that's obviously an instrumental track, the singing on the album I think was actually really good, in fact, and because Kim Beacon, obviously, who's no longer with us. But, it's kind of, I only sort of met him for this project. So he's almost is like the man on the album to me, this person who obviously went through this process. So it kind of, it has a certain sort of bleak quality for that, which I think is quite attractive.